but let's get started. Thank you so much for everyone who said hello in the chat and where you're joining in from. It was genuinely lovely to see some familiar names and a lot of people dialing in from Australia and New Zealand and lots of different organisations as well. Um, I'm joining today from Adelaide, so I'd like to commence by acknowledging the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the land of which I'm speaking, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend that acknowledgement to traditional custodians of the lands that you're all joining in from today, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are here with us. We recognise their continued connection to land, waters, and community, and we thank them for their ongoing custodianship. Today we're going to be going over outreach, so practical tips and resources to help you contact your existing supporters and encourage legacy giving. There's a bit to get through, but we're going to do as an agenda, we're going to do a very quick introduction before we talk about any online legacy giving more broadly and why it's got such an important role to play at this specific point in time. We're also going to go over understanding your audience, building your actual outreach strategy, some messaging and storytelling advice, and some different digital channels and tools in which you can use. We're also going to talk about how to measure the success of your outreach campaigns, and we're going to look at some action plans and some simple next steps just to help you get started for following the webinar. Finally, if time permits, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. But in the meantime, if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, you don't have to wait until the end to ask them. Just send a message using the Q&A function at the bottom or as part of your Zoom settings, and a colleague of ours is on the call and will reply to that straight away. If it's something that might require a bit of a longer response, we'll come back to it either at the end of the webinar or we'll answer it as part of the follow-up after the webinar as well. And yeah, just to be clear, that's the Q&A function rather than the chat function for your questions, obviously, because that makes it a lot easier for us to track what's been asked and what's been answered. Let's get into some intros. Hopefully, I certainly recognised a number of familiar names and organisations through the chat, but hopefully some of you will recognise me by now if you've been a regular to the webinars. But for anyone who hasn't joined us before, my name is Mike. I'm the Head of Partner Success here at Everywill, and our team is here to support any organisation that has decided to partner with Everywill, whether that's on our free tier or on our premium subscription. And today you've got two Michaels for the price of one, as I'm joined by our Partner Success Manager, Michael, who's relatively new to our business, but I'll throw to you, Michael, to introduce yourself.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. And hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm a newer addition to the team. So this is the first time I've had the pleasure of co-hosting one of these webinars. But I have managed to catch up with a few people on this call. So it's nice to see some familiar names popping up. As Mike touched on, my role is all about understanding your unique Gifts in Wills goals and strategy and working with you to support that strategy and achieve those goals. That could be anything from checking in with you to make sure the subscription you're on is actually working for you, helping out with campaign assets and guidance, and generally just being a main point of contact and sounding board if you need it. Yeah, so I think it's probably enough about us. Let's look at how Everywill's doing. So currently, around 165,000 wills have been created on our platform, and every single one of those has been free. Around 17% of those wills have included at least one gift, and in total, the estimated gifts are worth around $1.8 billion, which is pretty cool. Importantly, the wills platform isn't just free, it's easy to use, and will writers are very happy with the service they get. We have over 6,000 five-star reviews from verified will writers and an overall review rating of 4.9 out of 5. Naturally, all of this is translating into a lot of trust within the nonprofit sector. We're extremely grateful to have over 1,100 nonprofit partners who are using our platform to grow their bequest pipeline. All right, so now you know who we are, we'll move on. So let's get into why legacy giving through online wills is particularly important right now. And for this, we're going to be looking at various research and data. We'll send these slides out after the session, if you're wondering, so you can access all the research we're referencing to as well. All right, as many of you know, we are currently at the start of the Great Wealth Transfer, the largest transfer of personal wealth between generations in history. A study from the Productivity Commission found that an estimated 3.5 trillion in assets is going to be transferred in Australia by 2050, while a separate JB Ware study found that 1.6 trillion is going to be transferred in New Zealand over the same time frame. Currently, only around 1% of value from these deceased estates are directed to non-profits. Now, 1% of a few trillion is obviously nothing to be sniffed at. If nothing changed, that would mean that around 35 billion for Australia and 16 billion for New Zealand would be pledged to non-profits. But when we look at the difference in behaviours between traditional and online wills, we can see a really clear opportunity for further growth. So with traditional wills, around 8% include a gift to charity, but with wills written online via every will, that figure is around 17%. So already we're more than doubling the opportunity here, which is great. When we look specifically at wills written by known charity supporters, that's people who have arrived on our platform from a link you've shared from a campaign or something. 43% of those will writers pledge a gift. So statistically, if you can just get 10 of your supporters to write a will, you can expect between 4 and 5 high quality bequests. More broadly, this supporter base actually tends to pledge 2 gifts. So not only will you be benefiting your own organisation, it's highly likely they'll also be contributing to the wider sector as a whole. This really is an everybody helps everybody situation. The more we as a sector continue to educate the general public and known supporters about online wills and bequests, the more we'll see people accepting and embracing this form of giving. And the more non-profits will benefit from this great wealth transfer. But as generous as supporters are, actually getting them to write a will is where the challenge comes in. So we already know that 43% of supporter online wills include a charitable bequest, which makes them 3 times more likely to pledge a bequest than the general public. But currently, only around 13% of every wills are written by known supporters. The rest are written by the general public. People who either come through one of our ads or specific marketing campaigns, or who specifically search for us or on online wills. So one of the big opportunities here lies in boosting that percentage of wills written by pre-existing charity supporters. So what are the barriers? Well, a study of charity donors found that 27% cited time constraints as a barrier to estate planning. 38% said a lack of awareness around non-profit needs was a barrier, and 43% said that not knowing how to plan a gift was a barrier. So essentially, donors think will writing is too time consuming. They don't know what a non-profit would use that gift for or why it's really needed in the future. And finally, they don't really understand how they can go about pledging a gift. These are all barriers that are great to keep in mind when you're creating comms. All right, so we know writing a will is online is not vastly time consuming. It can take as little as 10 minutes on every will, and there's no need to visit a solicitor or JP to have it signed and witnessed. All you need is 2 independent witnesses. So a neighbour, a friend, a colleague, anyone who isn't going to benefit from the will. You can also look to include information about why your nonprofit needs a pipeline of future revenue, what it would be used for in the future, and any evolving risks to your organisation. Maybe you have research on how much more support is going to be needed in the next 10, 20 years, or how political, legal, geographical, or environmental factors are going to make the work you're doing harder or affect your work in the long run. And finally, charity supporters are saying one of the barriers is simply understanding how to do this. Even if you're not ready to directly ask supporters to pledge a gift in their will, offering education on how to do so, if they eventually choose, is a positive step forward. All right, let's talk about your audience and the people who are writing wills and pledging gifts. Mike, I'll throw back to you for this.
Thank you, Michael. So for this, we're going to be talking about who's most likely to write a will and pledge a gift, as well as what their motivations are. We've already touched on some of the barriers, and we'll be briefly revisiting some of those as well. So if we look at age group first, and here we are looking at wills written, gifts pledged, and value of gifts pledged. One of the first things you might notice that about this is that the demographic splits are actually pretty even, barring the under 25-year-olds. So for those of you who are more familiar with the traditional bequests, this might appear as quite unusual. Historically, Gifts in Wills fundraising has focused on much older demographic of supporters, and that made sense because stewarding and building relationships in that area was previously very time consuming and quite expensive. But online wills has flipped that on its head completely. This is now a new way to connect with every age of supporter, and not only see an influx in gifts coming in, but also to get an understanding of the supporters who are truly dedicated to your organization and feel a deep connection with your cause or the great work that you're all doing. Um, there's arguably no stronger signal of commitment than a supporter choosing to include your organization in their will. I genuinely believe that. Even though that gift might not be realized for 20 or 30 years or more, the act itself can reflect a deep intention to give. And it's a clear invitation as well to build a closer relationship with that supporter that honors their future gift, but also can grow support in the here and now. There's research to back this up as well. So, an analysis of charitable giving in the US found that donors who add a charity to their wills increase their annual gifts by an average of more than $3,000 per year. And another US study found that individuals with a charity in their will donated more than twice as much money annually than those without that commitment. Let's now look at parenthood. So the first thing we notice here is that the splits are very, very different. The majority of wills are written by parents, about 64%, while only half the gifts that are pledged by parents, and maybe perhaps most strikingly, is less than a third of value is attributed to parents. So not only are non-parents far more likely to pledge gifts, they're pledging higher value gifts as well. And on the surface, that makes a lot of sense. We know that one of the biggest motivators for writing a will is to put a safety net in place for children or partners. And we also know that one of the barriers to pledging a bequest is ensuring that children and partners are provided for. They're not only motivations or barriers to keep in mind, and they're certainly not the only motivations that drive people to write wills and pledge a bequest. We'll get to some of those motivations in a moment because tapping into them and as well as the barriers can really provide an awesome opportunity for us as an industry to increase the number of non-parents writing wills and pledging bequests. If we can do that, it'll be an extremely effective way at driving up charity revenue. So it's obviously worth keeping in mind. So let's look at some of those motivations. So these motivations are from a really interesting study. I recommend everyone go and check it out, and it's going to be linked in the slides, and we'll share a copy of that with you after the webinar. But essentially, the researchers arranged 10 different focus groups with people who had made a bequest, and they held really in-depth discussions to pull out the motivations because they found that simply asking people what their motivations wasn't sufficient enough. So they had time they had to take the time and dig in because sometimes people hadn't overtly realized what their motivations were, and it was actually something that was driving them under the surface a little bit. They found that there were a few different categories of motivations, including generic giving motivations, identity-based, bequest-specific, and organizational. And these are really important to keep in mind when you're creating your outreach because it gives you useful insight into what's actually going to get people over that line. So starting with some generic motivations, we have prestige, where people would get recognition from peers or a wider community for their bequest. In some cases, people talked about how this gave them leverage. So one of the examples was used by a professor at a university, and they said that making a bequest gave them more influence in their institute. There was also personal benefit. So people talked about how they were motivated by donor awards, invites to events, thank you gifts, and those sorts of things. Then there was reciprocation as a clear motivation in terms of that they felt motivated to reciprocate the benefit that they or someone close to them received from a charity. And finally, and perhaps most enduring, is that people were just motivated by that warm glow feeling. So the joy and satisfaction of giving back. There were also identity-based motivations, and they focused on community and values. So some donors said that they feel strongly with the specific community connected to that organization, whether that was a hyper local charity or a health condition, a culture, a religion, and those sorts of things. And others said that they were motivated by a strong match between their own values and that organization's values. The researchers also identified motivations that were specific and unique to bequest giving. And they were a lack of family need, so either no children or their children were financially well off. In some cases, it was that they felt very, very strongly that they didn't want a specific relative to inherit. Then there was a desire to live on, so being remembered by that organization, family, or beneficiaries. Another one is making a big difference, and this one's one of my favorites. But some people recognize that they couldn't ever give to the same extent during their lifetime, but they wanted to make a big impact, and a bequest was the perfect way to do that. And finally, the financial benefit of minimizing estate tax. So this was a US-based study, so it's a little bit of different implications there, but just to give you the full rundown of different representations of these motivations, we included that one. And then lastly, there were organizational motivations. So some people pointed to the perceived performance of the organization, its efficiency and effectiveness in achieving its goals. And that's really, really important. And it's why we recommend including a section on your Every Will landing page to highlight what you'll do with those bequest funds or donations in general and what that helps achieve. Then we also had the professionalism of the organization, which was and fundraisers, as well as the standard and quality of their communications and their outreach. And finally, there was the quality of the personal relationship directly with the fundraiser. So there's a bit to take in there, but I think some of these motivations do sometimes get glossed over, and it can be quite helpful, obviously, to bring them back to the forefront and when thinking about drafting your communications. And here we've got some of the quotes from that research, which are particularly interesting. One of the quotes mentions appreciation of being brought closer to the organization, which again really highlights the importance of stewardship, which I've seen so many of our charity partners do really meaningfully and really well. I won't go over all of these quotes here, but we obviously just wanted to present them there for a quick read through. And again, we'll share these slides with you from early next week, and you can have a read through from there. Let's go through some of the barriers now of pledging a gift. So again, from a study which will be linked in the slides, there's some significant barriers were identified. So one of them was solicitation, which is pretty self-explanatory. People who haven't been asked to make a bequest are less likely to. So there's probably your biggest motivator right there to reach out to people. Family needs came up. So data showed that people with children or grandchildren had a 91% lower probability of leaving a bequest. Interestingly, income played a role, but perhaps not as you would think. So research has found that people with incomes over $104,000 had a 70% lower probability of leaving a bequest compared to those earning under $52,000. And again, this is really quite fascinating because historically, gifts in wills fundraising has focused on higher net worth individuals and higher value estates. But with digital bequest programs being much, much more prominent and obviously affordable to operate, teams can now reach out to a broader demographic, which is who are also very likely to pledge gifts themselves. Um, and of course, even if the gifts do end up being smaller, it's still financially viable. Financial insecurity came up. So people who didn't believe they had enough to make a meaningful bequest were 29% less likely to pledge a gift. So again, that's a barrier that's very easy to address in your communications, talking about how any gift, no matter the size, has an impact. And again, given that online wills are or can be free to write, they're not hindered by the cost of estate planning. And finally is perceived difficulty. So people who saw legacy giving as complicated or burdensome were 63% less likely to leave a gift. So we've obviously gone over a lot, but I really do want to again touch on all of the benefits, motivations, and of course some of the barriers of writing a will, because again, these are worth considering in your communications because a person does have to get over that hurdle first before they pledge a gift. So this is pretty interesting because it can be easy to conflate benefits of and drivers of writing a will when really they're quite separate. So we have all the benefits on the left there, in the left-hand column there. So financial security, avoiding conflict, providing certainty, setting up guardianship for children and provisions for pets, having a say over asset distribution, providing charity support, and having a say over funeral arrangements, and general peace of mind as well. But when we look at what actually drove real people to writing their will, some different events and motivators came up, and they include death of a family member or close friends, a personal illness or illness in the family, birth of a child or grandchild, a divorce, separation, or marriage, the purchase or sale of a major asset, a major relationship change, and finally, the desire to give to charity. So again, I know we have provided a ton of context on what really motivates and gets in the way of people writing their wills, pledging a gift. So let's look at some strategies to get in touch with them. Michael, I know you're big on storytelling and conversation, so I'll let you lead this next part.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so for this, we're going to be focusing on creating a framework for sustainable, respectful legacy conversations. So, not every one of your touch points around online wills and bequests are going to be a hard ask. As we've already touched on, a lot of supporters aren't familiar with bequests or don't see bequests as a type of giving that's easily available to them. Add to the mix that we're talking about online wills, a little hand holding isn't going to go amiss for sure. So a huge pillar of your digital outreach strategy is going to be education. So that's things like announcing the partnership with Every Will to your supporters, framing that as an easy, free, and alternative way to support your cause, but also just a benefit in itself, having a free will. I thank you for being a supporter because, of course, the will is still free and they don't pledge, even if they don't pledge a gift. Um, the education piece also includes providing information on what bequests are actually are, because that's maybe a quicker FAQ or an Ask Me Anything with your bequest fundraiser can work through that. It's also worth providing guidance on how to make a bequest, showing supporters that it's actually something very easy to do. And then very important, sharing impact stories of the tangible effects of gifts in wills and sharing testimonials or case studies from bequesters is super important. You can also and should include gentle asks in all of these comms, but their core purpose is to educate and inch people closer to pledging a gift. In terms of the invitations, that's where we're moving into direct asks within newsletter articles, blog posts, case studies, etc. So we also want to see a dedicated EDM campaign, ideally a multi-part series to different segments of your supporter base. And in line with that is social media posts. So posts or emails within your employee and volunteer channels. And then finally, asks integrated into customer journeys. For example, your welcome packs, donation cancellations, and anniversary comms. So the third pillar is around retention. So for those supporters who do share their contact information with you, it's all of the standard bequest retention and stewardship activities you might expect. This is like a personal thank you email or phone call, adding them to your legacy group or society if you have one. People love community, exclusive updates and recognition, annual touch points and invitations to exclusive events or activities. We also strongly recommend asking your bequesters to participate in interviews and case studies so you can share their stories. Not only does this help influence other supporters, but also plays into that recognition element that some people really appreciate. So all of these things really do contribute to increasing the likelihood that the gift will remain in the will, but also that those individuals increase their day-to-day giving and remain close to the organisation. All right, let's move on to some messaging and storytelling. So we will be following up with an outreach guide that has tips and templates for you to adapt and take inspiration from. That's going to cover everything from partnership announcements to case studies and multi-series EDMs. It's not necessarily the best use of time to go through all of that and specific templates now. So instead, we're going to keep a touch on a few things to keep in mind now, and maybe what things to avoid and what other topics to broach. All right, so let's start with storytelling, which is super important. Storytelling is one of the most powerful tools you have in your mission to grow bequests. It's going to be much easier for organizations that have several bequesters who they can talk to, conduct interviews with, and who can share their motivations and decision-making journey, or can demonstrate real impact from previous bequests. So you can say that, Mrs. Jones pledged $10,000 and this is exactly what that gift did and the impact it had. Those impact stories are critical. Even if you don't have those, you can still incorporate stories from the people, animals, or causes that are going to benefit from a gift. For example, a real story from a child who received sponsorship for school supplies, a vulnerable adult who was able to access safe accommodation thanks to your cause, a specific dog that received life-saving care, a local landmark that was protected or rejuvenated. Even if they weren't directly helped by a bequest, telling their stories paints a picture of how a bequest would have real, tangible impact. It shows supporters that their gift and their decision in that moment could eventually lead to that impact. If you have these stories, we strongly encourage you to share them. And if you're able to, actually share the most relevant stories with the relevant audience. The more a story reflects the life of the reader, the more likely they are to make a bequest. So maybe you go out to your volunteer base with a story of a volunteer who pledged, so you can resonate with that more. Maybe you go out with people who have benefited from your charity with a story from someone who did too. Maybe you are splitting age, gender, whatever demographic information you have, the more nuanced you can make it, the better. Of course, if you can't do that, any story is still extremely powerful. Just getting something out there that talks to the impact of a bequest is gold. Okay, so in terms of messaging, okay, so we can link this back to everything we know about motivations and barriers. Building in messaging around symbolic immortality, the ability to live on, to extend your values, about being remembered by loved ones, the charity, its beneficiaries. Also, the ability to have more, like a more significant financial impact than would be possible during life. Some incredible bequests come through for organizations that can really change how a year goes and the trajectory. You can also reinforce their perceptions around community, connection, and identity. Maybe you know already that they're a generous supporter, that they care about this cause, that they're a part of the community. Okay, next for some key do's and don'ts. So start with the values and story rather than with legal mechanics of writing a will or pledging a bequest. Try not to use jargon or overly legalistic language. Use the word gift instead of a bequest, unless you're explaining what a bequest is. You can use donor stories that mirror your audience if you can. Build connectedness where you can, and don't assume disinterest after the first outreach. It may take a few gentle touches to get someone over the line and engaged. Ask clearly. Not every communication needs to have the ask front and center, but it should have a clear, unambiguous ask. Remember to frame the conversation around legacy and impact. Mention the ease of giving and share tangible impact of gifts. All right, I think that's it from me. Mike, back to you.
Sounds good. So let's chat about the different digital channels and tools to use when organizing your outreach. So not much new here, but a few things to consider when you're working with these different platforms. With EDMs, we do recommend segmenting by audience so that you can tap into different motivations and stories of the people in that segment. Of course, we understand that that's not always possible, and it's certainly not a deal breaker if you can't do that. We also recommend signing off the email from an individual person rather than your organization or team. So maybe your CEO or your head of fundraising or head of planned giving, whatever you think is the most appropriate for that message and the intended audience, sign off from that person. And then we also suggest that EDMs be multi-part. So ideally 2 or 3 emails spread over a few weeks. And finally, it can be tempting to create the most beautiful interactive email, and that's great if you can do that, but plain text emails also perform just as well. So it obviously helps speed the process up, and it's a good way just to dip your toe in where you can. And then with newsletters, this is probably a personal favorite of mine. It's an absolutely fantastic education opportunity, informing a wider supporter base about what bequests are, what the organizational need is, sharing those stories where you have them. Although we absolutely highly recommend also sharing stories in the EDMs as well. But the newsletter piece is a really great place to get that message out far and wide. And it's a great spot for showcasing case studies of either recipients or bequesters. And then with your website and blog post, again, this is a really important piece for education. So build in a bunch of FAQs around this so that you can target bequest specific search terms. And if you have other resources, link to them. So you can also link them to your custom online will landing page. With social media, our data does show that relatively few gifts come through social media channels, although we do still see it as absolutely worth doing, especially when it's free. So just to manage expectations around this, with social media campaigns and outreach, we've found that it's more top of the funnel channel. It exposes people to the concept of bequests, which is, again, an ideal spot for storytelling and perfect place to share some videos. We do also recommend sharing information on your workplace platform. So whether that's Slack or Teams or your intranet or wherever that may be. Um, but when you do this, just we recommend framing it as a heads up to staff that they can access this and it's a fringe benefit, or so to speak, and that no gift is required in the will. So you can also highlight to them that they can share that link with friends and relatives and their own network, as anyone can access, obviously, the free will. And then finally, with videos and webinars, I feel like I keep going on and on about stories, but they are very, very important. So it's the perfect medium for storytelling and highlighting bequester stories there as well. It's also a unique opportunity to create content around the instructional side of will writing and bequesting as well. All right, the next part is what really motivates Michael and me because we are absolutely obsessed with understanding what success looks like for our partners. So let's look at some of the ways you can actually figure out if all of this has been successful, because there is more to it than just receiving gifts, even though that's obviously what we all want at the end of the day. So one of the biggest tools at your disposal here is the Gifts in Wills Management platform. Let me tell you why. So we've built in a ton of analytics and tracking into the Every Will platform so that you can easily and accurately get a good understanding and visual representation of how your outreach is performing. So that includes figures like number of confirmed gifts, estimated value, total visits to your wills page, total unique visits to your wills page, will accounts created, and then obviously wills written and completed as well. And so overall, you can see so much about the level and also the areas of engagement of your outreach and your campaigns. And yes, gifts are important, but it also really is really helpful just to see where people are responding or engaging. Some of the time we see people commence the process of creating their will and they create an account and they leave a gift months after. So we've built into our will writer journey follow-up communications that encourage people to finish writing their will and consider leaving a bequest as well. But really importantly, for anyone on our premium membership, you can easily create different campaign links and a unique tracking link per campaign for whatever outreach you're doing. So with that in mind, if you send 3 emails, you can create a unique campaign link for each one of those emails and see which one performed better. If you want to A/B test the copy of 2 different emails, you can easily create individual links and track them. You'll be able to see, confirm, and measure all. And did one email generate more click-throughs or visitors, but had lower conversion rates of wills written or gifts pledged? And it's very easy to do this. So in the platform, just go to campaign section, click create a campaign, and a box will pop up asking you to give it a name and to choose a channel. For any of our premium tier partners on today's webinar who aren't sure how to do this, or if you're one of our basic tier partners and you'd like to explore whether or not this feature would be valuable to you, please just let me know and I'll point you in the right direction. Let's jump to the next one, just conscious of time. So let's look at some actionable steps. So this is going to be about some simple and tangible goals to take away. I don't want to call it homework, but in many aspects, it is a bit of homework for you to make the most out of what we've spoken about today and also what you can do next. So these goals are spread across preparation, outreach, and follow-up. So starting with preparation first, is the first goal is to identify a donor willing to share their story. If you have a handful, that's a great start. The more the better as well. So if it's not feasible for your organization, identify a story that you can tell. Next is review your custom landing page to make sure it aligns with some of the things that we've discussed. So again, focus on clearly highlighting the impact bequests have on your organization and aim to captivate visitors into considering a gift in their will whilst keeping the tone soft and optional rather than overly directive. Also take the time to review your bequest page on your own website. So create one if you don't have one already, but make sure that there's a clear and a simple call to action. So ideally, this could be a button that directs supporters to the EveryWill platform so that they can easily start writing their will for free. Once you've got some of those basics down, next is to try some outreach. So again, using the story you've identified, create a dedicated EDM around that and get it included in your regular newsletter. Make sure to include an ask to consider a bequest and a link to your landing page or directly to your wills page. And then the next goal, again, is to post on social media. That could be anything from, did you know that you can give without spending? Here's what a bequest is. Or it could be a video of a bequester telling us why they've decided to plan their gift. Anything to spread the message far and wide and to continue to normalize charitable gifts and wills, the better. And finally, share a link to your custom landing page on your employee and volunteer channels, whatever they may be. Inform them of your partnership with EveryWill and offer them a simple free will as an employee perk. And then finally, looking at follow-up is make sure that you send thank you emails to anyone who pledged a gift and shared their information. We've got some great examples of this. If you need them, just let us know and we can certainly share some examples. Reach out to confirmed gift pledges, inquiring if they'd like to share their story. Again, bring everything back to storytelling and helping you build up that library that you can share across various channels. And then lastly is book a follow-up with our team to see how else we can support you taking the next steps. Michael, myself, the partner success team, we deeply care about your strategy, your goals, and the support that you need in your partnership with us. So please do keep us very busy in meetings and with all of your questions.